Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: is the balance tilting towards Russia in Ukraine? With all eyes on the Middle East, does the West have a viable strategy for Ukraine? Al-Shifa hospital raid serves as potent symbol in Israel-Gaza war. Warts and all, international law is still better than no law. Putin the ideologue. Is the balance tilting towards Russia in Ukraine? Financial Times. This podcast episode discusses the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The host, Gideon Rachman, interviews Jack Wadling of the Royal United Services Institute in London to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. They discuss the military capabilities of Russia and Ukraine, as well as the economic challenges faced by both countries. The episode concludes by noting that while the conflict may currently be at a stalemate, one side could quickly gain the upper hand. With all eyes on the Middle East, does the West have a viable strategy for Ukraine? Financial Times. The West must prove to the world that Ukraine is a viable and stable country worth investing in, even as the conflict with Russia continues, according to a Financial Times op-ed. The article argues that the West needs to support Ukraine politically and economically, and demonstrate that it is committed to the country's future. It warns that if the West fails to do so, it risks not only losing the conflict with Russia but also undermining the political identity of European societies and the existence of the EU itself. Al-Shifa hospital raid serves as potent symbol in Israel-Gaza war. Washington Post. Israeli forces entered Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, on Wednesday. Israeli officials claim there were military structures under the hospital and other medical facilities that belonged to Hamas. Hamas has denied these allegations. The hospital has become a potent symbol of the war for both sides. For Israelis, it is a symbol of Hamas's use of civilian facilities for military purposes. For Palestinians, it is an example of Israel's brutal tactics and targeting of non-military sites. Al-Shifa's symbolism goes back further than this war. It has adapted with Gaza over the years. The hospital was opened in 1946 as a medical facility during British rule. It became the main medical center in Gaza after Egypt took control of Gaza following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. It fell under Israeli control after they took Gaza back from Egypt after the 1967 war. The hospital began expanding to its modern size in the 1980s, led by a team of Israeli architects, with U.S. funding. However, the period of peaceful cohabitation that was hoped for never took root. Warts and all, international law is still better than no law. Bloomberg. The article discusses the controversy surrounding international law, particularly in relation to the conflict between Israel and Hamas. It argues that while Hamas has undoubtedly broken international law by committing war crimes and using civilians as human shields, there are accusations that Israel has also violated international law. The article highlights the ambiguity in international law, particularly when it comes to defining proportionality and collective punishment. It also questions the enforcement of international law, using the example of Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine, where he has committed atrocities but is unlikely to be arrested as Russia is not a party to the Rome Statute. The article suggests that international law is not considered law because it is difficult to enforce and lacks a world government with a monopoly on legitimate violence. However, international law is argued to be indispensable as it helps to maintain norms of humanity and restrain combatants during times of war. It concludes that although international law may be imperfect, it is necessary in order to prevent even worse suffering. Putin the ideologue. Foreign Affairs. Russian President Vladimir Putin's approval rating has remained high despite the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Analysts have often overlooked the importance of ideology in explaining Putin's political resilience, focusing instead on socioeconomic factors. However, the Kremlin has been successful in crafting a worldview that justifies the war-related challenges faced by Russians. This ideology, which promotes a sense of Russian exceptionalism and the need to defend the country's traditional values, has become a defining feature of Putin's regime. The Kremlin has recently released a series of documents that seek to codify state ideology, such as a decree on Russia's spiritual and moral values and an updated document on Russian culture. The Russian education system has also been overhauled to promote the official propagandist line. These efforts reflect a sustained campaign by the Kremlin to shape Russian identity and cultivate a specific ideological narrative. The core elements of Putin's ideology include the imperative of a strong Russian state, the safeguarding of Russian exceptionalism, and a narrative of a besieged Russia under threat from the West. The Kremlin's ideological campaign has been successful due to a combination of factors. Firstly, many of the narratives promoted by the regime draw on attitudes that are already deeply entrenched in Russian society. Secondly, the malleability of Putin's ideology allows the regime to accommodate change and appeal to different constituencies without undermining its core message. Thirdly, the Kremlin provides a forward-looking vision for Russia, promising to restore the country to its former glory and challenge Western hegemony. Finally, the share of the Russian population willing and able to counter these ideological trends is shrinking rapidly. While the Kremlin's ideology is not invincible, the overall outlook remains gloomy. The simplicity of its narratives and Russians' susceptibility to history-inflected myth-making suggest that this ideology will remain entrenched. U.S. policy should take into account the existence of a Russian ideology and should aim to contain Russia's aggressive actions while also supporting alternative viewpoints within Russia. Funding diaspora communities and institutions that harbor different views of Russia's past and future could help cultivate a more ideologically diverse Russia. California's first lesbian Senate leader could make history again if she runs for governor. Associated Press. The Speaker of the California State Assembly, Toni Atkins, has said she is seriously considering a run for governor. Atkins, who is a lesbian and would be the first openly LGBTQ governor of California, is in the final year of her second and final term as Senate President pro tempore. She has previously voiced her ambition to break the glass ceiling by becoming the first woman to occupy the office. Atkins cited her experience as a legislator and as a former mayor of San Diego as reasons for her to be chosen by the Democratic Party. However, she faces strong competition in the race to succeed Governor Gavin Newsom. Other candidates include Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond, former Comptroller Betty Yee, and Attorney General Rob Bonta. California is the most populous state in the U.S. and the world's fifth-largest economy. Taiwan candidate says he still hates the party he'll run with. Bloomberg. Ko Wen-je, a top presidential candidate in Taiwan, has expressed his dislike for the party he is teaming up with, suggesting that the partnership may be a rocky one. Ko stated that he hates both the Kuomintang, KMT, party and the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, but agreed to cooperate with the KMT due to concerns about the risk of conflict with China. The agreement surprised his aides. Taiwan's election is significant in the context of the strained relations between Beijing and Washington, and the election of a more China-friendly government in Taipei could remove a potential flashpoint between the two economic superpowers. She makes up with Biden. Now what about Trump? Bloomberg. Chinese President Xi Jinping needs to consider what a second Trump administration would mean for the U.S.-China relationship. While President Joe Biden has pursued tough policies towards China, his approach has been predictable and stable. However, a second Trump administration would likely be more volatile, with the security rivalry with China becoming intense. Trump's China hawks would likely be given more authority to further restrict China's access to technology and accelerate economic decoupling. The U.S.'s One China policy could also be targeted, risking an aggressive response from China. Xi should take precautionary steps to prevent the relationship with the U.S. from collapsing. Biden to Israel, it's a big mistake to maintain occupation of Gaza. Yahoo! President Joe Biden stated on Wednesday that he believes the fighting between Israel and Hamas will not end until there is a separate Palestinian state. Speaking at a news conference, Biden said he had advised the Israeli government against reoccupying Gaza once the war ends. He also mentioned that he has been negotiating with Arab countries and others about the next steps to be taken. Biden's administration has previously expressed a desire to see the Palestine Liberation Organization rule Gaza and the West Bank at the end of the conflict. Additionally, Biden criticized Hamas for hiding its fighters under a hospital, calling it a war crime, and stated that Israel did not carry out a large-scale attack on the hospital but was being careful in its approach. Biden and Xi try to calm tensions. 3 takeaways from the high-stakes U.S.-China meeting in California. Yahoo! U.S. President Joe Biden said that he and Chinese President Xi Jinping had made important progress during a 4-hour meeting in Northern California on Wednesday. The meeting was aimed at defraying tensions between the two countries over issues such as Taiwan's sovereignty and the war in Ukraine, as well as the origins of the coronavirus. One of the key areas of discussion was the fentanyl trade, which has been a major source of friction between the two countries in recent years. Biden said that Xi had acknowledged the problem and the need for Beijing to do something about it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 6 Degrees Briefing with me, Dr. Six. Today, we've got a wide range of news stories to discuss, from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine to the ideological resilience of Russian President Vladimir Putin. But before we dive into these topics, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Six, your witty and knowledgeable observer from the 6 Degrees world, here to provide you with a fresh perspective on global events. Now, let's jump right into it. First up, we have the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The Financial Times brings us a podcast episode that analyzes the military capabilities and economic challenges faced by both sides. While the conflict may currently be at a stalemate, one side could quickly gain the upper hand. So, is the balance tilting towards Russia? Well, it's a delicate situation, and only time will tell. Moving on, an op-ed from the Financial Times argues that the West needs to support Ukraine politically and economically to prove that it is a viable and stable country worth investing in. Failure to do so could not only lead to losing the conflict with Russia but also undermine the political identity of European societies and the existence of the EU itself. It's a tough challenge, but one that the West must tackle head-on. Next, the Washington Post highlights the symbolic significance of the Al-Shifa hospital raid in the Israel-Gaza war. The hospital has become a potent symbol for both sides, representing Hamas's use of civilian facilities for military purposes for Israelis, and Israel's brutal tactics and targeting of non-military sites for Palestinians. The article reminds us that symbolism can be powerful and can shape public opinion in times of conflict. Moving on to international law, Bloomberg discusses the controversy surrounding its application in the Israel-Hamas conflict. While both sides have been accused of violating international law, the article argues that international law, imperfect as it may be, is necessary to prevent even worse suffering. It's a thought-provoking analysis that highlights the complexities of enforcing international law in a world without a centralized authority. Shifting our focus to Russia, Foreign Affairs explores the ideological resilience of President Putin. Putin's high approval rating despite the ongoing conflict in Ukraine can be attributed to the Kremlin's successful crafting of a worldview that justifies the challenges faced by Russians. By promoting a sense of Russian exceptionalism and the need to defend traditional values, the Kremlin has shaped Russian identity and cultivated a specific ideological narrative. It's a fascinating insight into the power of ideology in politics. Now, let's turn our attention to the home front. The Associated Press reports that Toni Atkins, the Speaker of the California State Assembly, is seriously considering a run for governor. If successful, she would be the first openly LGBTQ governor of California. It's an exciting prospect and a chance to break the glass ceiling. In Taiwan, a top presidential candidate, Ko Wen-je, has expressed his dislike for the party he is teaming up with. This partnership could be a rocky one, but Ko agreed to cooperate with the party due to concerns about the risk of conflict with China. Taiwan's election is significant in the context of strained relations between Beijing and Washington, and the election of a more China-friendly government could have far-reaching consequences. Speaking of China, Bloomberg discusses the need for Chinese President Xi Jinping to consider what a second Trump administration would mean for the US-China relationship. While President Biden's approach has been predictable and stable, a second Trump administration would likely be more volatile and intense in its security rivalry with China. Xi should take precautionary steps to prevent the relationship from collapsing. Finally, President Biden made a statement on the Israel-Gaza conflict, stating that he believes the fighting will not end until there is a separate Palestinian state. He also advised against reoccupying Gaza once the war ends. It's a delicate situation, and Biden's words carry weight as he negotiates with Arab countries and others about the next steps to be taken. Well, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the conflict in Ukraine to the ideological resilience of Putin, and the potential for a historic run for governor in California. It's always a pleasure to share my insights with you, and I hope you've enjoyed today's briefing. Now it's time for you to join the discussion. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Do you think the balance is tilting towards Russia and Ukraine? How important is ideology in politics? And what about the upcoming elections in California and Taiwan? I can't wait to hear your perspectives. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the world around you. This is Dr. Six, signing off. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.